The wind howled outside the small cabin, rattling the windows like it was trying to warn us. Snow fell thick and fast, turning the forest into a white, silent world. I could feel the cold seeping into my bones, and for the first time in weeks, I felt completely alone except for her. She was a stranger, really a CEO from New York, who had somehow ended up stranded in the same cabin I was renting for the weekend. And yet, despite everything, there was a quiet, almost fragile warmth between us. "Can I slip under your blanket?" she whispered, barely audible over the wind. My heart skipped. Not because of the words themselves, but because of the trust in her eyes. I didn't know her, but at that moment, the world outside didn't matter. It was just two people, two strangers, and the unexpected kindness that had drawn us together in the middle of a storm. Before we dive into the story, I want to take a moment to invite you to join our community. If you love heartfelt, inspiring stories like this, hit that subscribe button, give us a like, and leave a comment below. We're Truth Lions you. And we bring you stories that warm your heart and restore your faith in humanity. It all started on a Friday evening. I had planned a quiet weekend getaway with my 8-year-old daughter Mia. Life as a single dad isn't easy, and sometimes it feels like the world expects you to do it all: work, parenting, house, life without a pause. I needed a break, and the snowy cabin tucked away in Vermont seemed perfect. I imagined hot cocoa, board games, and a little breathing room to just exist without the constant rush of emails and meetings. I wasn't expecting anyone else. And yet there she was, Laura Stanton, a high-powered CEO, bundled in a designer coat that somehow didn't look practical for the snowstorm outside. She had arrived at the same cabin, clearly underestimating how quickly the weather could change. We laughed awkwardly at first, me, in my worn hoodie and jeans, and her, all elegant and poised, slightly out of place in the rustic retreat. By nightfall, the storm hit in full force. The wind screamed, snow piled high, and the electricity blinked out. Suddenly, the cabin felt impossibly small, and the outside world seemed dangerous and distant. We realized almost simultaneously that we were stuck, no way to call for help. No heat except the wood-burning fireplace I managed to get started. And it was freezing. Laura tried to keep her composure, as CEOs are trained to do. She checked her phone, tapped her foot impatiently, and gave orders she had no way of enforcing. I watched her for a moment, then shrugged and said, "We're just going to have to ride this out together." She looked at me like I had just said something completely insane, but there was a glimmer of relief in her eyes. As the night stretched on, something unexpected happened. We shared stories. I told her about Mia, how she's funny, stubborn, and loves superheroes. How bedtime stories sometimes turn into philosophical debates about fairness and friendship. She talked about her life in New York, about boardrooms and quarterly targets, about the pressure of always having to be in control. It was strange how quickly barriers fell when the storm raged outside. Here we were, from completely different worlds, learning to see each other as people rather than titles or roles. She smiled genuinely for the first time. Not the polite CEO smile that the cameras might capture, but a real one. And I realized in the flickering firelight how much kindness mattered, how even small gestures could make a person feel seen, safe, and less alone. At some point, she shivered and admitted, almost shyly, that she hadn't packed for this kind of cold. I had a spare blanket, a heavy one I'd bought thinking I might need it for Mia. She hesitated, then asked quietly, "Can I slip under your blanket?" It was such a simple question, but it carried weight. Not just physical warmth, but a trust, a connection. I handed it to her without thinking. And in that moment, I realized kindness wasn't about grand gestures, it was about noticing someone's need and responding with compassion even when you had nothing to gain. We sat side by the fire, wrapped in the same blanket, listening to the wind howl outside. We didn't talk much after that. Sometimes words just get in the way. But there was a sense of peace, a sense that humanity could shine even in small, unexpected ways. Mia eventually crawled into bed between us, sensing the strange camaraderie we'd formed. At first, she wrinkled her nose at Laura, suspicious of the stranger in her dad's cabin. But by the next morning she was teaching Laura how to build a snowman, laughing like the three of us had been friends forever. Over the next 24 hours, the storm showed no sign of letting up. We shared meals by the fireplace, played card games on the small wooden table, and even managed to cook a half-decent breakfast with whatever we had. The CEO who commanded boardrooms was suddenly just a person, laughing at burnt toast and spilled coffee, showing a gentle, human side I never expected. By the time the snow finally stopped, I realized that the storm had done more than trap us in a cabin. It had stripped away pretenses, expectations, and the roles we played in our everyday lives. It had revealed the power of kindness, The way simple acts of warmth and understanding could turn strangers into friends, and strangers into a small, temporary family. We parted ways at the cabin's doorstep, the sun shining on fresh snow, and something in me had changed. Laura hugged Mia with a genuine tenderness that spoke louder than any words, then turned to me and said, "Thank you for the blanket, for letting me in, for everything." I watched her drive away, the tires crunching over snow, and felt a mixture of sadness and gratitude. Sadness because it was over, and gratitude because it had happened at all. The memory of a shared blanket, shared stories, and shared laughter reminded me that kindness doesn't need a reason. It doesn't need a reward. It just needs willingness to notice, to respond, to care. The story stayed with me long after that weekend. Mia talks about the CEO lady as if she's a character from a fairy tale, and I find myself thinking more intentionally about the small ways I can offer kindness to people I meet. Whether it's a neighbor, a stranger, or a colleague, those moments of human connection matter more than we often realize. I started volunteering at a local shelter, just a few hours a month, bringing hot meals and blankets. I reached out to old friends I had lost touch with, sometimes just to listen. And I began noticing how the world seems a little less harsh when you let small acts of kindness guide your day. That weekend in the cabin was more than a story about a storm or a stranded CEO. It was a lesson about humanity, about the importance of empathy, and about how opening yourself up even just a little can make a difference. Kindness doesn't need to be dramatic. It doesn't need to solve every problem. It just needs to exist. And sometimes that's enough to change someone's world. Years later, Mia still asks about Laura. She asks if she's okay, if she's happy, and sometimes if she'll come visit again. And every time I see her eyes light up at the thought of that weekend, I'm reminded that kindness leaves a lasting impression not just on adults, but on children too. It teaches them that the world can be warm and generous, even when it feels cold and scary. So if there's one thing I want you to take from this story, it's this. You never know the impact of a simple act of kindness. A blanket shared, a smile given, a listening ear extended. It might just be enough to make someone feel less alone. It might just be enough to remind them that the world isn't all harshness, all noise, all rush. Sometimes it's quiet, gentle, and deeply human. And when that moment comes, whether it's in a cabin during a snowstorm or in the middle of an ordinary day, don't hesitate. Let the kindness flow. Offer it freely, without expectation, without judgment. Because kindness has a way of returning, often when you least expect it, often in ways that make the world feel a little brighter, a little warmer, a little more hopeful. That's the story of the single dad, the CEO, and a storm that brought them together. It's a story about blankets, yes, but more importantly, it's a story about heart, opening, humanity shining through, and the enduring power of kindness. Remember, every small gesture matters. Every moment of compassion creates ripples that can reach far beyond what we see. So today, this week, this month, look for a way to be kind. Hold the door for someone. Send a note of appreciation. Offer a blanket to a stranger. You never know whose world you might warm, whose heart you might lift, whose day you might change. Kindness is contagious, and when it spreads, it has the power to turn storms into memories, strangers into friends, and ordinary moments into something extraordinary.